And we welcome you to Real Prayers for Real Life in our series that we're calling the Bible. You know, most people read the Bible asking, what happened? What happened in this story? And that's an important question. But it isn't the most important question. Here's the question that changes the way that you will read the scripture. If you can ask yourself this question when you're reading, why did God preserve this account for every future generation? Why did God preserve this account in Scripture for every future generation? Today, let's jump in and discover what God's Word would want us to see. As we begin today, I want to start with this statement. When thinking and talking about the Scripture, the setting of the stories and the accounts that we read in the Bible, the setting belongs to history, but the situation belongs to every generation. Many people open the Bible and they ask one question, what happened in this story? And they read to find out what happened. There's nothing wrong with that because it's important. But history matters, and that is a historical thing. But history and the reporting of the history in the scripture that we see at the times, events, and things that happened is not the true purpose of the Bible. God didn't preserve those accounts so that we could admire ancient history. He preserved them because every generation would eventually stand in the same kind of situations that we see in Scripture. Now the names have changed. The nations have changed. The names of nations have changed. The culture has changed. But fear hasn't changed. Temptation hasn't changed. Faith hasn't changed. And God hasn't changed. Let's listen to what Paul says in Romans 15, verse 4. For whatever things were written before were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scripture might have hope. Notice what Paul does not say. He doesn't say that Scriptures were preserved simply so that we would know the historical events that happened a long time ago. He says that they were written for our learning. That means that every account has a purpose beyond the people who first lived it, those who firsthand experienced it. The setting belongs to them at that time, but the lesson belongs to us. 1 Corinthians or 1 Corinthians 10 and 11, Paul says it very clearly. Now all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. Now examine that carefully. They happened to them. They were written for us. That's an incredible statement. The events belong to one generation. The instruction and the lesson belongs to every preceding generation after that. That's why Scripture never becomes outdated. Every account that we see in the Scripture has two parts. First, you see the setting. That's the history, the historical part. Egypt, Babylon, Jerusalem, Rome, Thyatira, and we could go on and on. Those belong to another time. The second is the situation. Those are where you and I live. People still lose hope. People still wonder what God is doing. And maybe even if He's doing anything, people still face impossible decisions that they don't know what to do. People still struggle with temptation. Many people are still waiting on promises. People still battle fear. The settings change, the location and the time, but the situation doesn't. That's why the Bible is always current. Think about the story of David and Goliath, and we won't go into great detail on that, but just to lay a little bit of groundwork. When we talk about David and Goliath, people remember the shepherd and the giant, the little shepherd boy. And I remember when I was in church, they would sing, the children would, only a boy named David, only a little sling. Maybe some of you have heard that. Takes me back to my childhood. But most people remember the shepherd boy and the giant. That's the setting. But what situation did God preserve so that we would learn from it? A believer facing something impossible, someone who is following God under His direction. Every generation, every family, every person has giants. Not the same giant, but giants. The same situation. Maybe yours isn't 9 feet tall. Maybe mine isn't 9 feet tall. Maybe it's a diagnosis. Maybe it's a mountain of debt. Maybe it's just simply the fear of the future. Or maybe just fear itself. Different giant, same situation. God preserved David's account because someone in every generation would eventually stand in front of something that looked completely humanly impossible to overcome. But the scripture shows that through God, all things are possible. Let's look at another brief story. The story of Daniel. And we all know about Daniel and the lion's den. Now, it's quite obvious that the story about Daniel and the lion's den, Daniel being thrown to the lions, is not for Daniel. Daniel didn't get out and say, hey, write this in a book and let me read it. The story is for those that would come after him. The setting was Babylon. He was in a foreign government, a foreign culture, and a foreign king. That's the historical reference of it. They had been taken captive. Daniel had, and the other Hebrew children had been taken captivity into Babylon, and he was under the control and the rule of a foreign power. But what was the situation Daniel was in? Even though taken away from everything that was familiar to him, being thrown into a foreign power that ruled over you, the situation was remaining faithful when obedience to God could cost you something or even everything. You know, people still lose promotions because they won't compromise. People stand alone because they choose to obey. They're singled out. They're shunned. Right? People still face pressure to fit in, to be like everyone else, to not be wearing a red shirt when everyone else is wearing white. You stick out. No one wants to stick out and be secluded and singled out and to be persecuted for that. So the pressure is to fit in, to yield, to obey, to compromise and go with the flow. The pressure to compromise isn't just in history. It's current. Everyone at a time in their life comes into a situation to where it would be so much easier to just compromise, just to let it go. God will understand. No, God will understand. God knows. God knows what you're doing. Let's just briefly touch on one more. Joseph. How about Joseph and the coat of many colors? Joseph lived in Egypt. That's the setting. But the situation is he had been treated unfairly while God was quietly working all things for his good. Joseph was betrayed by family, the people who loved him. He was forgotten. He was outcast. He was sold. He was lied against. He was put in prison through false accusation. Now, some of you are starting to feel and think, yeah, that's kind of happened to me in a similar way. And that's the connection I'm wanting you to make, is the connection. Yes, historically it happened back there. That's the setting. But in all reality, the situation is present, very present in today. All of us will come into situations where we will be betrayed by friends, we'll be lied upon, we'll be accused. And it will seem like God is not saying anything. But Scripture says that He works all things for our good. Doesn't mean that everything that happens to you is good, because it's not and it won't be. But in the end, God will take all the ingredients of your experience in your life and He will make a masterpiece with it for your life. God never abandoned Joseph, but he felt abandoned. He felt forgotten. Some of you have felt abandoned and forgotten, that God doesn't even care anymore. Is there even really a God? The devil comes with the same accusations and the same distractions to everyone. Is God really real? Does He really care? How could this really happen? Why is this happening if God is with me? Joseph's answer to that question is that God was always faithful. Different century, different time in history, but the same situation. God was not faithful because of Joseph. God was not faithful because of Daniel. God was not faithful because of David. God was faithful because of God. He Himself is faithful. And when you are faithful, you do faithful. So it's not that they were better than us. It's not that they were different than us. It's that they are the same as us. The setting is a different time and a different place, but the situation is still the same. And God is still the same. God does not change, and He does what He does because of Himself, not because of someone else. The Bible isn't simply God's recording of what happened to people centuries ago. It's God's revelation of who He is when ordinary people face situations that every generation, including you and me and the generations to come, should the Lord tarry, will eventually encounter. So remember this: the settings belong to history, but the situation belongs to every generation up to now and every generation going forward. And the next time that you open the Scripture, don't stop and start looking to see what happened, the setting, what was going on there. Look for the situation and the revelation that God is trying to reveal to you that can become true and living in your life. Because somewhere in those pages, you'll find someone standing right exactly where you are standing, where you have stood, or where you will be standing. And you'll discover the same God who met them is ready to meet you today. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening to the Bible. And remember this: in the Scripture, the setting belongs to history. The situation belongs to every generation. Read the account, find the situation, and discover the God who never changes. I'll see you next time. God bless you.